This is LBC with Nick Abbott. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
And now let's check in with Simon Marks. Simon is LBC's Washington correspondent and joins us on the line now. Hello, Simon.
Good evening, Nick.
So, very, very busy week again. Donald Trump seems to have been able to find another billionaire who is willing to do his bidding. This chap called Steve Witkoff. What do we know about him?
Yes, well, Steve Witkoff is extraordinarily, I think it's safe to say, now the Trump administration's point person in terms of engaging in dialogue with President Vladimir Putin of Russia and sitting down and trying to figure out how they're going to advance peace negotiations with regards to Ukraine. And you might think, well, what sort of seasoned diplomat is this man, Mr. Witkoff? What kind of global experience does he bring to the table in terms of conflict resolution? The answer to that question is none. He's basically a real estate mogul, just like Donald Trump. He's known Donald Trump since the 1980s. They are golfing buddies. They have struck many a deal together. And he has become Donald Trump's sort of special envoy Svengali. I mean, the man that he turns to go and be his Mr. Fix-It. So he was the special envoy who was sent at one point a few weeks back to read Benjamin Netanyahu, the riot act in Tel Aviv. Then he became the special envoy dealing with Russia, initially on the repatriation of an American detainee in Russia, Mark Fogel, who had been jailed by the Russians on drugs charges. Mr. Witkoff went to the Kremlin. The Kremlin decided they liked the cut of his jib, and he managed to get Mr. Fogel back to the United States. Now, he's been talking to Vladimir Putin about Ukraine, and he's also been talking to Tucker Carlson, the former Fox News presenter, about the way in which he, Mr. Witkoff, appears to have become utterly beguiled by Vladimir Putin. In this interview with Tucker Carlson, he talks about how his meeting recently in the Kremlin with Donald Trump, with Vladimir Putin, got personal. Because the Russian president handed Mr. Witkoff what he describes as a beautiful portrait of President Trump, painted by a man he only identifies as the leading Russian artist. Yeah. And this was a gift for Donald Trump that Mr. Witkoff dutifully returned to the United States. He also says that Vladimir Putin told him that after the attempted assassination of Donald Trump on the campaign trail in Pennsylvania last July, the Russian leader was so upset by this that he went to his local church, met with his priest and prayed for Donald Trump because he had a friendship with him and was praying for his friend. And Witkoff says that when he conveyed that information to President Trump, you know, both information about the painting and the praying, Donald Trump was clearly touched by it. So what we've learned from this is that Vladimir Putin is playing Steve Witkoff like a Stradivarius. Yeah. He also, in this interview with Tucker Carlson, slams the Prime Minister. On the very day that the Prime Minister has been the subject of a pretty glowing profile in the New York Times, which wrote on Sunday that the crisis over Ukraine has transformed Mr. Starmer into something akin to a wartime leader. And Keir Starmer, in his interview with the New York Times, invokes the spirit of Churchill and also Clement Attlee, saying it would be a huge mistake for the UK right now to pick between Europe and the United States. Well, Mr. Witkoff, whether he knew about the quotes in that New York Times article is unclear, but Mr. Witkoff absolutely insists that what Keir Starmer is engaged in by suggesting he may provide UK peacekeepers in Ukraine is, in Mr. Witkoff's words, a combination of posture and pose. He describes the Prime Minister's position as simplistic, and he says there's this sort of notion that we've got to be like Winston Churchill, that the Russians are going to march across Europe. I think that's preposterous. So take that, number 10.
Yeah, I mean, the guy's all over the shop. This Witkoff said, I don't regard Putin as a bad guy.
Yes. And asked by Tucker Carlson if he thinks that the Russians have, covered territorial gains in other parts of Europe. Witkoff says 100% not. He also makes it evident in the interview with Tucker Carlson. It goes on for like 90 minutes. It's all on posted,
really?
Of course, on Elon Musk's social media platform, because where else would you want to go to see it? He also indicates very clearly that he has been negotiating the dismemberment of Ukraine with Vladimir Putin. He's actually unable to name the 5 regions of Ukraine that he thinks the Ukrainians are going to have to give up. But he basically says in this interview, they already have Ukraine, they've got what they wanted, so why do they need more? And he indicates that those regions in the east, Donetsk, Luhansk, and so on, they're also going to end up in Ukrainian hands. So he's the Russians have got him around their little finger and are, as I say, playing him like a violin.
Yeah, and I know that in America, they're still sort of trying to get their heads around what is happening and why Donald Trump and all of his envoys and mouthpieces are still spouting Kremlin propaganda. I mean, America has done a handbrake turn on Russia, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely, completely. And you know, even to the point of delivering Putin massive victories with things like the shutdown of Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. You and I talked last week about the shutdown of Voice of America, but it was accompanied by the shutdown of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, that had been huge thorns in the side of Moscow during the Soviet era and since. And Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty had been struggling to operate in Russia since Vladimir Putin began his war on Ukraine. They'd become important outlets of news and information for Ukrainians themselves. And the Russian media celebrated the shutdown of these organizations as though it was a massive foreign policy gift to Vladimir Putin by Donald Trump. I mean, other institutions that have shut down, the Kennan Institute here, named after a famous diplomat, George Kennan, who first sort of decades and decades ago defined the way in which the United States ought to be engaging in containment of the USSR. I mean, the Kennan Institute has engaged in so much scholarship over so many decades of Russia. And to see that just absolutely thrown away and shut down is, again, a massive gift to a Russian president who sees in Donald Trump his ability to return to the top table of global affairs. Trump saying he should be back in the G7, promising that Ukraine's not going to get membership of NATO, and talking again and again and again, Donald Trump, about the possibility of the United States doing economic and geopolitical deals with Russia. He really wants to get American hands and American involvement on and American involvement in rare earth minerals, not just on the Ukrainian side of the border, but the Russian side of the border as well. And he seems set to encourage American businesses to go back into Russia, although how you do that, given how many of them had their assets expropriated by Putin and, you know, kind of lost billions the first time around, that's going to be a high bar to reach.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the enemies of the people. That would be this week judges.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a war on the judiciary, and it's being waged every single day by President Trump, by his White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt, once again this weekend by the border czar Tom Homan, who has repeated on television here today that he doesn't care what judges think or say about mass deportations. He's going to crack on with them anyway. Donald Trump calling for the judge who tried to halt mass deportations and failed last weekend, those flights to Venezuela and Honduras, calling for him to be impeached. The Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, took the highly unusual step of rebuking the president for that and saying judges shouldn't be impeached. They should just have to endure the normal legal appeals process. But Trump has continued, telling Fox News in the last few days that that judge is a lunatic. I see he's been at it against him again today on Truth Social, his social media platform. And you know, this is another major effort to change the nature of America's democratic arrangements and to undermine the Constitution, which says that the judiciary is a co-equal branch of government alongside the president and the legislature.
Yes, it's not America anymore. It's become a different country, and it didn't really take him very long at all. And the heads must be spinning in America, particularly on the Democrats' side. And is there any indication that they're getting their act together, the Democrats, because they seem to be doing the usual trick of the left and fighting amongst themselves?
Yes, I mean, en masse, there is no indication that they're getting their act together at all. Individually, there are a handful of Democrats who are now saying we've got to do something and we've got to respond to the growing number of grassroots Democrats who are furious that the party has kind of turned turtle and, well, in the words of James Carville, the veteran Clinton-era Democratic strategist, he actually advised the party to roll over and play dead. He said we should just wait for the Republicans to crumble and for the public to remember how much they miss us.
Yes.
The problem with that approach is that by the time the midterm elections roll around in November of next year, much less the presidential elections in November of 2028, they may not be the democratically organised kind of elections that this country has witnessed in the past. So it may be too late for all of that. So what we've seen over the last few days is Bernie Sanders, you know, the socialist gadfly from Vermont, and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York. They have been touring the country together. I think they've been to 3 states over the last 3 days. They've been playing to crowds of 85,000 people and above. They thought they were going to be lucky to draw 20,000. Let's not make too much about crowd size, because the Democrats read all the wrong conclusions into how many people Kamala Harris was attracting to rallies. But they are definitely tapping in to discontent among grassroots supporters. And so is one senator in Congress, Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, who has turned his social media platform, you know, he puts out pretty much daily video updates excoriating the administration for what it's doing. So it is very good. So there are definitely some Democrats trying to salvage things.
Well, I'll make a small wager with you that there won't be a presidential election in 2028. I'll put a fiver on it.
I'll not take that bet, but I'll wager with you that there will be an election, but its outcome will be absolutely guaranteed before a first vote is cast.
Okay. Simon, good to talk to you as always. Thanks for that. Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent.